Well, hello there again, friends. Today is 4/11/2022, and today is the Odin Project Vlog Day 90. Well, I have arrived. I have arrived at JavaScript, and more advanced JavaScript. Um, I said well, and I started that off on that note and that kind of tone because I don't know if I said this in my last video, but I was going to give myself a celebratory day off, and here I am. I couldn't stay away from it. Some, I tell you what, to be honest with you guys, some days it's a love-hate relationship. Today is just a love one. Like I was addicted. I couldn't get enough. I wanted to keep moving. Wanted to keep the momentum going. And then there's other days where it's like, this sucks. It's just the way it goes. But today was an embracing moment. I will caveat and say, depending on how I feel tomorrow, I might take the day off. We'll see. Because I was moving along pretty good in JavaScript. Here I'm 6% complete. These were quick little reads. It won't take us long to go through them. They're just kind of overviews, and honestly, I'm not even sure why this number one's in here. It doesn't really flow that well, and then I got to organize. That wasn't too bad. Organizing your JavaScript code introduction, and then objects and object constructors, and that came to a screeching halt real quick. And we'll go through that. But about halfway through, I got stuck, so I didn't complete that one. But we'll go through the half I did, and then I'll pick back up with that next time. And I purposefully slowed down, not because of rushing, because it got complex really quick. So, and I expected that because this is, even though it doesn't say advanced JavaScript, I'm calling it that, and that's kind of what it is. So, so without further ado, let's just go over this real quick. So I won't spend much time on these first couple modules because, for one, there's no self-checks. It's really just for you guys to read. Basically, they're just introducing the course module section, if you will, and how it'll work. They talk about the path if you're coming from Ruby, which kind of doesn't make sense. I feel like this this module was put in here a long time ago, and they just didn't take it out because they talk about coming over from Ruby, that you don't need to, excuse me, that you, if you came from Ruby, you might have to understand some more basic concepts to go back to foundations and take a look at some things. And then they talk about the Git section, but when you click the Git section, it actually takes you over to the Ruby Git, which I'm sure it's the exact same thing as the JavaScript section Git. We just haven't gotten to it yet, but it's weird that it flowed like that. So that was my first hint that this probably was a little. And they talk about the format, which actually isn't correct. The format isn't like what they say here. It's actually the same as it's always been, with the knowledge check at the end and the assignments, and so anyway, they basically, it's just an intro to how I think maybe how it used to be done. So yeah, so that's all I'll say about that one. So the next module, once it gets there, is a quick review. So this just goes over, if you need to have a refresher, go to the MDN page for JavaScript. To get a refresher on the syntax, and you can learn X and Y if you need to, a little quick reference. I didn't do that because I felt like I was ready to roll. Yes, it's been a hot minute since I've done JavaScript, but I figured it'd come bust out the cobwebs pretty quick as far as syntax. So I did, and I do recommend you guys bookmark these two pages. These are coding challenge pages, which we won't use right now, but I suspect they may come in very handy down the road when you want to test your skills, or like leak code type setup where you're wanting to do some tests for maybe some job interviews. I'm sure they'll go over all this in that last section that talks about getting employed, but I just have them in the pocket. I created a folder and called it code review, or what I call it. Doesn't really matter, but while I'm thinking about it, let's see. I called it where'd it go? Whatever. It was like code review. Here we go. This is what I wanted. Coding challenge sites. Goodness gracious. Thanks for holding up there with me. Coding challenge sites. Challenging sites. So, whatever. And then they talk a little about Jquery, which I don't know if it's really that necessary. They basically, long story short on that, they basically said it's old school. JavaScript basically does everything it needs to do nowadays, and so Jquery is kind of a thing of the past. But they recommend, if you want to learn it, to go to their website and read about it, become familiar with it. I didn't. I went ahead and skipped it. But basically, because they're saying that there could be backward compatibility, you know, old school code out there that's still using Jquery, because it just hasn't been converted yet. So that's that. And then you move on to organizing your JavaScript code introduction. I don't think this one had, no, this one's short, and this also doesn't have any, this also does not have any knowledge checks to it. Basically, it talks about organization, and basically up to this point, we haven't been having to organize code, and that's one of the beauties of JavaScript, is that it's pretty forgiving when it comes to its data structures, specific patterns, because many languages right there says force you into using specific patterns and data structures in your code, but JavaScript's not like that. Like, I totally agree with that. Like, when I'm in C# and I have my experience in the past with C#, playing around with it, it is a classful language and very much object oriented, and if you don't have your classes set up right, your code will not work, and inheritance is important and all that, and so JavaScript's a lot more forgiving, and they talk about things that are coming in the series: plain old JavaScript objects and object constructors, factory functions and modern module patterns, classes, and ES6 modules, which we kind of been over some ES6. I don't know if we've actually talked about it or read about it, but I remember Googling some of it in Stack Overflow, and I feel like the text has referenced ES6 before. I made a note of it on my board too at one point, because a lot of the new stuff you'll come across if you get into a startup or a company that has modernized their code, they'll be using the ES6 most likely. I don't know for sure on that. It's just kind of taking a guess at that, but yeah, so that's basically that, short and sweet. And then we move on to objects and object constructors. So they start out talking about object literals, which I'm not going to go through the knowledge check on this because there is a knowledge check at the bottom, but because I only made it halfway through, I'm going to go kind of the old school way, and we'll just kind of breeze through the top section here. So object literal is like creating this, instantiating this constant object and then creating the key value pairs for it. We've been through this before. One thing we haven't been through that I remember anyway is that we have not been through this embedding a function in here, which is coming down the pipe here in a moment. So as far as how to do that, what it's called. Their example here is just you can use quotes, double quotes, which we already know, to add a space in between, in order to utilize a space in between your key, and then you use when you're calling it, use bracket notation to call that. Excuse me. And then and then it's just talking about that more, like, if you do my object.variable, this will give us undefined because it's looking for a property name variable in our object, which doesn't exist. And then the bracket will say this is equivalent to my object property and returns value, which is kind of interesting because this confuses me personally, because whenever I see bracket, especially like this, especially with a a variable inside of it, that can easily be misconstrued as an array, to me anyway, especially when it's formatted like this. So you got to be careful to make sure that that you're that you're working with an object property and not an array. And then it says if you're feeling rusty on objects, you can go back to Fundamentals 5, which I actually did do that, just to get a quick refresher. So if you need a refresher on that, I would do that as well. And they talk about what we're going to learn, outcomes of this module, and they talk about objects as design patterns. And so it goes through here and talks about, like, here's an example of how to do it. Here's a different example of how to do it. And then this would be like creating and instantiating a player 2. And they're just going through and saying how the example 2 is the better way to do it, even though it's not the best way. But example 1 is very limited, and it's not a good way to do it, because it's hard to make a... What if you're calling something and you don't have a player, is kind of what it's getting at. Is what if you don't know you want player 2? What it's getting at is that you want to create a variable structure and a design pattern that allows you to be flexible, and that the variable is flexible in the aspect that you don't need to know, hey, I need player 2. You just say const player, and it will intelligently pick that based on input. I know I didn't explain that very good, but it goes into detail down here. And it says at first glance, the first doesn't seem so bad, and it actually takes fewer lines to write than using objects, but the benefits of the second option approach are huge. And then they demonstrate here with a function call. So you have a print name player, console log player.name. So this example 2 works better, because you're printing you're going to run print name player, and you're going to put player. So player goes into this would be maybe I'm confusing the two. Maybe that's not maybe that's not part of that answer. Okay, so it's creating a function here, and then just player.name from player. So it's a different example. And I'm kind of skipping some of this because it's all important. Take your time, read it, understand it, because I want to get down to the constructors here, because there is actually, they want you to do it. So here's how they basically, here's how you create a function, you input, name and marker parameter arguments. We've done this before. This is the difference though. So this .name takes the contents of name, and this .marker takes the contents of marker. So this is an important block. So this is how you set up a constructor. This is what I was trying to get at earlier when I was kind of fumbling through my words, that you will use this to have that flexibility you need. So you just call player, and it will return the player, that current player that's instantiating, so you can, report that out. You don't need to know, and you don't need to call a specific player. So here's an example of loading it. So you have a constant player equals new, and new is how you instantiate and load up the function with the player information. So you're going to call the player, and then it's going to have Steve as the name and X as the marker, because we're going to pull those arguments into the parameters up here. And we're going to console log that out, and it's going to say Steve, obviously, because that's the current name. Anytime you see this, anytime you see this, that's going to be the that current name of that current, where you're at in the code of that current variable. Sorry if I'm all over the place here trying to explain this don't fully understand it myself, so I hope I'm doing a good job explaining it to you guys. So, and then here's how you, so we load a player 1, we load a player 2 with different information. So it runs through, and then you call, there's a call here to player.1 say name, which this is the embedded function that it's using. So say name is actually an embedded function, as this passes in the function and then runs this code inside of the other function. So it's that nested function callback, ES6 style. So player1.sayName, it logs Steve because it's looking for the name, and the name is Steve. And then player2 say name is going to be also Steve because it's calling and logging out name. It's pretty simple. And then as you go through an exercise, write a constructor for making books objects. We will revisit this in the project at the end of the lesson. Your books object should have the book title, author, and the number of pages, and whether or not you have read the book. Put a function into the constructor that can report the book info like so. So it has the example, thehobbit.info. It should produce output of The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien, 295 pages, not read yet. Note, it is almost always best to return things rather than putting console.log in there directly into the function, which we already knew that from previous JavaScript. In this case, return the info string and log it after the function has been called. And to give an example here of what it should look like, so you're going to do, on your console.log, you're going to instantiate call the hobbit.info inside of the console.log, and we've done that in different exercises and in projects. So that's nothing new there. So let me minimize this down so we can have a dual pane setup here. So here is how I did it. So I created a function called book, and it's going to take in parameters of title, author, page, and read. And then you're going to have this. So we're creating this block here is the we're creating the object constructor. So this is going to be, this title is going to take the contents of title. This dot author is going to take contents of author. This dot pages is going to take contents of pages, and this dot read is going to take the contents of read. And then this dot info is going to take, it's yellow because it is a method, I believe. And it's going to take on function. So it's going to call an ES6 callback function and return title plus author plus a comma and a space plus pages plus a comma and a space again, and then read. And then down here, this is just the example. Really, you want to instantiate your variables at the top, but I'm doing it down here just for the sake of the exercise. So create the constant variable the hobbit equals new. So we're gonna create the we're gonna, is that called calling the constructor? I can't remember. So I don't exactly remember. I'm trying to get the words right, but anyway, we're going to create, the new is going to create the object constructor for new book, or for book. So we're going to have book, and then we're going to input in order from left to right, The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien, 295 pages and not read yet, separated by commas, spaces, and quotes as usual because they're just strings. And then we're going to console.log the hobbit.info as they shown in their example over here. And so what that's going to do is go up here. So we're going to tell, so we call new, it's going to push in all this information into book, and it's going to instantiate that as the hobbit. So that hobbit's going to get put into here under this, and then we're going to call. And as per the instructions, it said use a return statement, not a console.log. So that's why I have a return and then this stuff in parentheses with the quotes and the commas, so it looks good. And then it's console.logs out. So when you do the hobbit.info, it calls, because the hobbit is coming off of the object constructor book function, it's going to come up here inside a book and it's going to look for .info, and it's going to run that. So it's going to run that function and return that, and that return statement is going to be into the console.log. So hope that flow made sense. Please rewatch if you need further understanding. So if you go here to the browser and refresh it, I've already created a boilerplate called Object Constructors for title, index.12.html, and added that into the browser here. So and you know wired in my JavaScript called Object Constructors.js, and that's so you can just get this to run in the browser. And it says The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien, 295 pages, not read yet, just like they wanted. So hope that made sense. So I don't know exactly what this is called. That's not actually bugging me. So I'll either figure out for the next video or leave a comment below and let me know what they call this. It's not Object Constructor, because I think that's what this is. This is your Object Constructor. So I think that might be called, I don't know. I'm out of words. So let me know in the comments what you guys think that's called when you're doing that. Particularly this new book, calling the new function. I know it's said somewhere in here. Actually, now it's gonna drive me nuts. So see, new. Okay. Okay. So, which you call by using you can use by calling the function with the keyword new. Okay. So it is Object Constructor. Okay, so you call your Object Constructor here. So I guess I was just second guessing myself. So Object Constructor being called here, and this is the build of the Object Constructor itself. So hope that's clear as mud. So sorry this went so long. I did not mean for it to go this long today, but a lot of stuff. Take your time with it. Reread it a couple times. Take your time with it. Go slow. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content. And let me know in the comments section what you think of object constructors and the start of the advanced JavaScript section. So with all that said, till next time, see ya.